Hey, what's up, fellas? Welcome to the Effortless Gent. In today's video, we're going to be talking about style archetypes and suiting. So I just got back from LA. I spent about a week there with a bunch of my friends. We're actually a lot of men's lifestyle and style bloggers, and we usually come together once or twice a year. And I had a chance to talk to one of my friends, Tanner Guzzi, over at Masculine Style, and we talked about one of the best topics I think he covers, which is style archetypes. And the reason I like this is because you have to first figure out what your archetype is before you can start buying clothes for yourself. And when I work with clients and when I talk on the website about how to build a lean wardrobe over at Effortless Gent, we do some sort of process that's similar to this, but I think Tanner really nails it on the head with this idea of having style archetypes. There's 3 of them, and he's gonna cover that in today's Q&A. He also talks about suits, which is really great. And if you're in the market for a suit, or if you're looking for a suit of your own, you're gonna definitely wanna listen to what Tanner has to say. He has a bunch of experience working at custom company Beckett and Rob, who makes beautiful suiting. He's not there anymore, but he was there for a long time, so he knows a bunch of stuff, and we're gonna talk about all this stuff in today's Q&A. So let's get into it. So you run a site called Masculine Style. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about style archetypes, which is something that you cover a lot, and it's a subject that I love because it helps sort of describe what a guy is, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe you can go into that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I've found as I've taught guys over the years about how to dress better, dress more intentionally, that the problem that a lot of guys face is they think that the only way to do that means that they have to start wearing suits. And yes, that is one way to start dressing more intentionally, but for a lot of guys, there's not actually any benefit to that because they don't work in that kind of environment, they don't run in those kinds of social circles, and so they don't want to dress the way that they did, but they also don't want to wear suits. And as I've helped guys figure this stuff out, I started to realize that there are 3 kind of main camps that most men fall into, and most of us actually have kind of a combination of those 3 within us, but you definitely will lean primarily more in one direction versus the other 2. And by knowing how that works, it just eliminates all this other stuff that you shouldn't have to be worried about, so that you can actually focus on the stuff that you can wear that it is going to benefit your life.
So for the guys who are watching this and don't understand like what style archetypes are, can you talk a little bit about like what the 3 archetypes are, and then how you would kind of figure out where you fall on that spectrum?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 3 archetypes are rugged, refined, and rakish. And obviously the easiest way to do that is to, I've got a quiz set up on my site that if you go take that quiz, it's 8 questions. Based on your answers, it's actually going to plug that into an algorithm and then tell you what your primary archetype is. But the biggest distinctions between those 3 is just kind of like a shorthand for it, is guys who fall into the rugged archetype are those who impact the world around them primarily through physical methods. So they're guys who do blue collar work, or they're really creative as far as they're doing machinery or those kinds of things, and they're physically involved in the world, and they're not afraid of getting their hands dirty, they're not afraid of living in a small town or doing that kind of stuff. The refined are the guys who impact the world around them largely through their financial and their social methods. So it's guys who've got money and connections, and they want to be able to have that clout and those connections and that kind of being in the upper echelons of society. And then the 3rd archetype are the rakish guys, and they are primarily impacting the world through their rebellion. It's the guys who are the rule breakers, they're the rock stars, they're the ones who like to go against the grain, and that's kind of how they define their relationship with the world. And so if you find that you're leaning more in kind of one of those 3 camps, that's probably where your archetype is going to be.
Okay, I like that. So let's say, for example, you find yourself that you're like a refined type of guy, but at the same time you like more casual clothing. Mm-hmm. Or on the opposite end, let's say you're rugged, but you really like suits. How do you kind of play that into your wardrobe?
I love this question because it takes an actual understanding of the archetypes and then a realization that you're rugged, but you may need to wear suits, right? You know? And so, well, what do you do? And I actually had an experience with this with my uncle just within the last couple of months. He lives in this tiny town in Idaho, this population of like 200 people. And what he does for a living is he trains hunting dogs and owls and falcons. So I mean, literally like as like rugged as you can get. And we were at a funeral and he needed a suit for it. It was for my grandma, for his mom. And he went to like the men's warehouse and he hated everything because it was too shiny. He didn't have the vocabulary for it, but it was just too much in that refined archetype form. And so We ended up finding him a really good flannel suit that has texture, and historically you understand that like flannel and tweeds and those things were what the refined men of Western Europe would wear, or the United States would wear, when they were doing rugged outdoors things. Exactly. And so you can kind of combine that history of wearing a refined article of clothing in a more rugged environment. Wearing that to a funeral absolutely would have been inappropriate 200 years ago. Way more than appropriate now. It was perfect. He looked great. He looked respectable, but it still made him feel comfortable and confident because he was wearing something that was reflective of him.
I love that. So there's always ways to sort of find, like, let's say you do have to dress opposite of what you identify with. There are always ways to find like almost like your signature style.
Absolutely.
Okay. So do you believe in that? Like as far as like style in general and wardrobes, do you find like signature items are good to have when you're sort of building your style?
Yeah, I think that one of the best things to do is, I mean, I've got a signature piece of, I've got a ring that I wear, and what most guys experience is something that I experienced. I'm sure that you experienced it, but a lot of times as we start dressing better, start dressing more intentionally, we'll overcorrect. Like we'll go into, I've got to have like stacks of bracelets and multiple necklaces, and everything's got to be unique, and I'm making a statement for myself. And that's great that you get to that point, because it's better than just being caught in the inertia of wearing the same thing or whatever it is that comes from that. But then the real experts, the guys who get really good at this, are the ones who then come back from that and are still able to maintain certain elements, like your necklace, for example. Really subtle, not anything that's overly done, but it's not the same thing that the average guy would be wearing. And so it's indicative of the fact that you care about this stuff, you think about it, but you don't have to scream it out from the rooftops, I like style. Like it's just, this is a very well executed outfit, but it's not something that somebody would see you walking down the street and go, that guy's a style blogger. And to me, I like that. I like the idea of wearing something that looks like I care, that it's communicating who I am and kind of what my aspirations are, but it's not totally over the top.
Yeah. In that same vein, let's say we're talking about comfort when it comes to style. How do you help guys sort of, if they have this feeling that if they are more interested in style, or even in suits in general, that they're going to be uncomfortable, or they think that it's not going to be like feel like them. How do you sort of help them like understand that it doesn't have to feel that way when you change your style?
For me, the best comparison is one that's like weightlifting, because let's say that you want to get stronger, and let's say that you have a goal of you want to be able to deadlift 500 pounds. You go into the gym and you put that many plates on the bar and you try and deadlift it, you're not going to be able to. You can't. But if you go in and you figure out what your 1 rep max is, and then the next time you do it, you put on 5 more pounds, and you slowly and incrementally start to work your way up, then eventually you get to where you can handle that kind of weight. Right. And the same thing goes with your style. If you're really worried that you're gonna take it to the extreme, that it's not gonna be you, you're gonna feel like a fake or a fraud when you're wearing this stuff, I think that's a healthy sense of skepticism. I think that's built into us for a reason. And so if you just look at it as, well, I don't need to go spend $3,000 on really expensive things and totally overdo my wardrobe in one day, but I'm just gonna, the next time I need to get shoes, I'm gonna get better shoes. Right. Or I'm gonna go pick up a few better shirts, and the quality is gonna be better and the fit's gonna be better, even if they are just like plain t-shirts or something to that effect. And so you are gradually improving your aesthetic while still being able to maintain who you are internally and what that's communicating, and still being able to communicate who you're aspiring to become. Because I think if you pull who you are and who you aspire to be, if they're too far apart from each other, the best way to do that is to kind of move there gradually, as opposed to 100% dress to who you aspire to be with complete disregard for who you currently are.
Let's say I'm a guy who is simply starting out. He doesn't want to overcorrect, or I'm sorry, he doesn't want to go overboard, but then he also like kind of needs to find his way, right? Like, what's the best way to sort of not feel like you're playing dress up?
From my experience, what I've found is, as I spend time on forums or on Facebook groups or anything else, the guys who tend to really get into this idea of it playing dress up and it's starting to look like costumes. I saw a guy on a group today who was wearing a green tweed suit and a bowler hat, and it's like, dude, nobody wears bowler hats. Right. Like you can't, like it's so far removed that it becomes a problem. And then the argument is always, well, what if somebody just wants to stand out, and what if somebody wants to be unique, which is a legitimate thing. But from my experience, what I've found is that the guys who tend to overcorrect are the ones who The only interesting thing about them are the fact that they dress in an interesting way. And you don't want it to be your primary defining trait, that you're a guy who's into style.
Yeah.
Just like if you're into bodybuilding, you don't want to be the dumb, muscle-bound idiot who doesn't have anything else going for him. You want other people to understand that there's substance that comes with the style.
Right.
Because otherwise it's just vanity, or it's a lack of social fluency, and you're relying way too much on this external thing to give you internal value.
Right.
And so if you can find what it is, because these guys, they have things that are interesting about them, they just rely too heavily on what their style is.
Yeah.
And so if you can find the things that are interesting about you and then find ways to tell those stories through your clothing, as opposed to your clothing itself being the main story that you want people to tell, that's going to protect you from overcorrecting at any point.
I feel, so I always tell my readers, I'm like, you have to step back a little bit. Don't focus too much on like the granular things or what kind of shirts you need or whatever. Like you have to really step back and look at your life and see like what makes sense for you today, right now.
Yeah.
Based on what you do, based on where you live, based on even how much money you have to invest in a wardrobe. Like there's a lot of factors that come into play, and I think it's important to sort of step back before you start buying stuff.
Absolutely. You have to be able to, buying stuff and putting things on, their tactics. It's the actual final step of execution. But before you have tactics, you need to know what the objectives are. You need to know what the goals are and the strategies and all these other things. And I think that's why you and I get along so well, because we both focus on kind of that higher stuff of what are the goals, what are you trying to accomplish, what stories are you trying to tell? And then from there, if we teach guys that kind of stuff, once you guys get that kind of stuff, then it's really easy for you to figure out what your own tactics are.
Right.
Whereas a lot of other guys will say, here's this tactic, here's that tactic, here's that tactic, and you just do that and you'll be good. But it doesn't apply to every guy in every situation. Whereas the principles, the philosophies, all that stuff, that absolutely applies to every single one of us. And then you can actually execute on that application according to what works for you.
Yeah, and I think when you take the time to like really think about it, it makes building a wardrobe that much easier.
So much easier.
Right, because then you're not like, oh, do I need that? Does that make sense for me? Because you already know, because you understand like where you are in life and what you need.
Yep.
How does a guy start to sort of like step up his suit game without overcorrecting, while still being sort of like in his element, right? And the reason I'm asking you this is, if people don't know, is you used to work at a company called Beck and Rob. What was your position there?
I was the director of store operations.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of experience, I'm sure, helping guys too.
Tons, yeah.
Okay. Well, how do they start? Where do they go? Let's say they can't afford made to measure or even, bespoke. What are some like sort of tips that they can keep in mind as they go shopping for suits?
The biggest thing, whether you're doing off the rack or you're going all the way up to bespoke or anything else, for most guys, is to understand that if you really want to improve your suit game, your suit should be the canvas. I think a lot of guys think that the suit should be like the main focal point. And unless you're really into the sartorial world of suiting and you run in those circles, most guys, they're buying suits for business purposes or for other reasons. And so as boring as it is to focus on navies and grays, maybe Prince of Wales or really subtle patterns or bird's eyes or other textures or anything, the main purpose of wearing a suit in that kind of environment is to show that you have discipline, to show that you respect yourself, and to show that you expect respect from other people. Now, you can take that in the wrong direction and you can wear a completely garbage suit that fits poorly, it's made of really bad cloth, there's nothing that looks disciplined or respect-inducing about it, and it doesn't matter if it's a suit, it doesn't matter if it has lapels or shoulder, I mean, yes, technically it's a suit, but all the things you're trying to accomplish with wearing it are thrown out the window because it's a garbage suit.
Right.
So if you can focus on the fact that the suit is a means to an end and you're trying to communicate those other things, then you're not going to do what we call it was going custom crazy, where you have guys who come in, and I did this myself when I first started with Beckett and Rob, where you just get so excited about all these custom things that you can do that you've never been able to do with off the rack. You just do it all. But then nobody sees you, they just see this really loud, crazy suit.
Right.
Yeah, and for most guys in most environments, the suit should not be the focal point. The man wearing it should be the focal point.
When it comes to price versus quality, let's say you can only choose one, let's say you're on a limited budget, where should one focus? Like, should one just get the best suit for what he can afford at the moment? Should he spend a few months saving up for something that's better quality? What if he can't tell what the quality is, right? Where does he decide to invest his money over time?
I would say the best approach is, especially because suiting is such a weird world where there really isn't anything, there's this whole kind of gap in the middle that's kind of hard to fill. And that doesn't mean that you have to get a $200 suit at H&M or you have to get a $10,000 bespoke suit. Like, yes, there's a lot of variation in there. But typically that's what I'll tell guys, especially as they're just figuring it out or they need something sooner rather than later, but they can't afford it, is it's fine to buy a cheap suit. And really that's the same way with any of this stuff. Anything that you teach guys in the lean wardrobe, like it's fine to buy cheap stuff if that's the best you can afford, especially if immediacy is the need. But then rather than thinking, okay, I have my lean wardrobe down, I've got the bottom layer of the pyramid done, and now I can move up a layer. Don't do that until you buy the best quality that you can afford with this bottom layer, and then start to move up. And so many guys get frustrated with that because it's like, I already bought a blue suit. Why should I go buy another blue suit when I'm spending this kind of money? Like, let's get the gray pinstripe suit, or let's get the brown Prince of Wales suit. But the problem is when you get that suit, you don't wear the blue suit anymore. I think you wrote a post about that. Yeah, right? Yeah, absolutely, because that's my own experience. Yeah, is you're just like, sweet, yes, I've got this, I've got my basics already figured out. But then as soon as you up your game and quality, you don't want to wear the old crap anymore at all. And so it feels frustrating where it's like, bought a crappy blue suit, then I'm gonna buy a nice blue suit, and then I'm gonna expand from there. But ultimately, you're not going to wear your bad stuff anymore. And so if you know it's something that you want to wear all the time because you've worn the crap out of it as a lower quality version of it, invest in a higher quality version of it.
Let's say a guy comes to you, he needs your help. He has a $300 budget for a suit. $300. Do you have specific store suggestions for him?
No. No, especially because so much, again, this comes back to the idea of archetype and lifestyle and all these other things, because if he's a skinny, young, urban kid, go to H&M. Yeah. Seriously. If he's an older, established guy who lives in a small town and the only thing that he can do is vintage or Men's Warehouse, try to find what you can that's vintage and then go to Men's Warehouse and just be really assertive with the salespeople who are way more concerned with making a sale than actually helping you get into something you want, you know? Right. And so I wish that there were kind of like a one-size-fits-all answer, especially 300 is tough. Because as soon as you go up to 4 or 5, then it's like, go to Suit Supply. If you get up to 7, it's like, start with Beckett and Robb, made to measure. And so, you know, as soon as you can, but I will tell guys that, where it's like, if you think you're at 300, don't go out to eat and don't go get drinks for a few weeks, and just inch yourself up just a little bit more.
So do you think 500 is a good starting point for a decent suit?
Yep.
Okay. What are your suggestions for something like that?
Suit Supply is a great one. Okay. Yeah.
Like their baseline is like $3.99 or $4.99?
I think so, yeah. And then really, if you're going into made to measure, even just going a little bit further and getting up into Beckett and Robb it's awesome. Yeah. Especially because the made to measure experience, a lot of times guys think, well, that just means it's going to be skinnier. And that's not the case. Custom is way more than just how skinny something is.
We talk about this a lot.
Yeah, and I love that because most men's bodies are weird. Yeah. I mean, I've got really long, disproportionate gorilla arms. I broke my collarbone when I was 14, and so my right shoulder drops more than my left. I sit too much, and so I get this weird anterior pelvic tilt, and my back curves. And all of these are things that somebody who does made to measure or bespoke with a really good company, the fitter can account for all that and create a garment that looks phenomenal on you. And the average guy isn't going to be able to quantify and be like, well, yeah, the posture on that jacket's killer, you know, like, but they're going to be able to tell the difference, even if it's the exact same cloth, made to the exact same quality standards, and the circumference is like they're the same amount of skinniness or fullness. Even if all that is the same, the fact that they can correct for posture and shoulder slope and sleeve pitch and all these other variables, it's going to look better, and people will notice that it looks better.
It makes a huge difference. Like, if you were to buy off the rack, and for you, I'm sure you would even see like the wrinkles in the bag, you would see like the ill fitting, but you don't know that, like, as if you haven't experienced custom, you wouldn't know that.
Right.
But then you can also tell, like, when you look at yourself in photos or whatever, that your suit doesn't look quite as great as it looks like on a guy who's wearing a bespoke suit, right? So
yeah.
It's huge. And then you can't really, like you said, quantify or like figure out what it is, but it's all about the fit. It's all about the fitter telling you that you're, like, I just discovered, like, my right shoulder is a 1/4 inch lower. I never do that.
Right.
You know, it's like, oh.
And so you get a guy who can actually account for that, and he'll say, okay, well, on the right side, we're going to drop the armhole by 1 centimeter or 1/4 of an inch, And then as a result, that shoulder's gonna drop, but then the way to counter for both of those is that we're gonna do a light shoulder padding on both sides. And you need guys who know that, as opposed to the sales associates you get when you go get off the rack stuff, and they're like, well, I got the tape and it says you're in at 43, so I'm gonna put you in a 44 because you may wear a sweater sometimes, and we'll just nip the sleeves so they're like right at your hands and you're good to go because I gotta make my next sale. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I do agree, like, even made to measure, if you can get the measurements right, that's even a step up above off the rack, but, you know, just some guys just can't do it. So I think your suggestion of like saving a little bit more, getting to that $500 level and just going for suit supply is a really good suggestion. When is a man playing dress up versus it actually being his style, and when does that transformation happen, if it even does happen at all?
I don't think that there's necessarily like a real fine line to it. And the question most guys need to ask themselves is, am I willing to commit to this long enough that it becomes part of who I am? I think the best example of this is Raphael from Gentleman's Gazette, because he wears really nice, really elegant, super dandy dressed up stuff all the time. All the time. So much so that it is part of who he is. We saw him this week in more casual stuff, and for us it's like, that's so weird, like that's not Raphael. And it's not that it doesn't look great on him, but it's just not telling the story that we're used to him telling with his clothing. And you can get to that point, but the question that everybody needs to ask themselves, and that's the same whether it's suits or it's like tactical military combat gear or it's hype beast streetwear or whatever it is, you have to ask yourself, how long, if it feels fake or if it feels like dress up, how long am I willing to slog through it being that way? And how much am I willing to sacrifice for it being that way in order to come out on the other side and have that be part of who I am? Because it's not a bad thing that there are consequences that come from it being dress up. That's just the reality of it. And so you can choose to say, all these potential negatives that come with it are worth it. And if that's the case, rock and roll. If you think that the benefits are worth the costs, then do it. There shouldn't be anything emotional, or my advice or your advice or our opinions about that really shouldn't matter. But I think what most guys want, really in everything, but especially in our style for some reason, is we want all of the benefits without any of the potential costs that come with it. And so you can take that with anything. I dress really uniquely and I'm really bold, but then I'm a more polarizing figure and people won't trust me as much. They'll see me as more of a rebel, but I'll certainly get more attention. Or I can dress really respectably and really simply, and people will always see me as kind of a good neutral, but then I'm not getting much attention and it's harder for me to be able to gauge things this other way. Each one of these has its own kind of benefits and its costs, and you just need to figure out which of those work best for you and then take it there. So if you really, really, really like dressing up and you're okay with those costs, do it. And eventually those costs will diminish while the benefits continue to build.
I think too, like how we mentioned earlier, that it's like progressive overload when you're working, when you're working out, right? Like if you just take it a step at a time, it won't feel like when you get to this level of where like you're like a Raphael, let's say for example, I'm sure like 10 years ago he wasn't dressing that way.
Right.
He slowly and built up his style, then he started like liking certain things, changing it up, adding it to his like signature style, and then now he's this guy, right? But I think like if you are able to sort of like take it step by step, then it's not going to be as much of a crazy jump as you think it will be. As long as you're patient and you can take your time and experiment with your style, right?
Right. Yeah, and think about how weird it would be if, actually that would be kind of funny if, you know, next time all of us get together, we all decide it's like, I'm going to dress like Baron and Baron's going to dress like Raphael, and how it would all be objectively good style, but we would all feel so uncomfortable and so disconnected from who we are because that style is not us. And so if you do that, if you just say, I'm gonna dive right into this right now and this is what I am, there are costs to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Dude, it's been great talking to you about this. I love this stuff, and I think that's why we have great conversations all the time, because we're kind of like on the same level. But
I love it.
I'm glad we had to have this conversation on camera because it's always interesting. So
thanks for having me on, man.
And
seriously.
Tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, best way to find me is I've got my own YouTube channel. It's just under my name, so it's Tanner Guzzy. That's Guzy. And then my site is masculine-style.com. That's where you can go take the archetype quiz and figure out what your archetype is.
Boom. Fellas, I hope you enjoyed that Q&A with Tanner. If you did, please go ahead and subscribe to his channel. I've linked to it below. And hey, while you're there, why don't you subscribe to mine as well? The button is right below this video, and there's also a little notification bell icon. If you click that, it's gonna let you know whenever we come out with a new video. And lastly, if you enjoyed this, please leave a comment and let me know. Hit that like button. Everything else that you can do, I would really appreciate it. And I will see you in the next video.